Hello, everyone. This is Scott Nelson from the Austrian Economics Center in Vienna, Austria, continuing our State of the Country, State of the Region series as part of our Free Market Roadshow. If you're enjoying what you're seeing, check out additional talks and webinars that we've got coming up. We're doing basically one every day, more or less, at fmrs.online. And it's my pleasure to be joined here today by, once again, actually for the second time now, by Nataliya Melnyk, who is director at the Bendukidze Free Market Center in Kiev, Ukraine. Welcome back, Nataliya.
Hello again.
Hello again. Nice to see you again. So we talked last time rather extensively about the situation in Ukraine, and as a follow-up to that, I was curious just can you give a little bit of an overview on how the situation has played out since the last time we spoke about a month ago? I mean, so what's the government done right during this period of time? Has the government done anything wrong? Has there been, the biggest mistake that it's made, for example? And just in general, how's the population taking it?
So, like a lot of other countries around the world, we haven't peaked yet when it comes to the pandemic. So we are still on the rise. And as a result, our extended lockdown, which was supposed to end April 24th, was extended again, this time until May the 11th. So we're still pretty much in lockdown. We're still pretty much fighting the disease as much as we can. Obviously, we do have some good developments when it comes to the pandemic itself, because only about a week or so ago, the numbers of recovered people actually became higher than those who died. So we've been going, towards the pretty grim scenarios for a while, but now we can see some positive changes when it comes to that. But when it comes to the government's reaction, actually the question about what the government did right is not an easy one, because when you think about it, you just can think of a million things that could have been done better or differently. But what I can point out, and I think it's important, is that the government is taking the problem seriously, which is a big deal, even though the reaction was a bit late. So if we are talking about knowing about coronavirus, let's say since the end of December, mostly January, then we as Ukrainians started preparing for it middle or late March even. So if we look at the official numbers, we can see that official procurement for items necessary to fight the pandemic started March the 20th. So it's incredibly late. And before that, basically the whole healthcare system was left on its own. That's why when we look at the stats right now, we can see that basically every fifth person who has been infected with coronavirus is a healthcare employee. Which is horrible if we take into account the state of healthcare system in Ukraine, and the fact that just by itself, it's difficult to tackle a problem of that scale. And if we are losing professionals, it's obviously becoming even more difficult when we have, more and more cases showing up. So that was a big deal, because in the beginning of March, we still had very important items like masks sold to other countries, while, our own people were completely unprepared. So that obviously has been rectified now, fortunately. And but to a large extent, I must say, by volunteers and local businesses who have been hugely supportive of their local establishments, healthcare establishments, and they donate, they fundraise, crowdfund, whatever they can do, whatever they can do to help the doctors. So I guess I already went to the biggest mistakes. I think one of the other things that a lot of people point out is that we might have overreacted a little bit to the problem, because as of now, we have 9,000 diagnosed cases of coronavirus in the country, compared to the population of 40 million people, or around so. Obviously, it all depends on the scale of testing, which is not that huge in Ukraine, so the numbers are not that representative. But if we talk about lethal cases, of those we have 220. And when we're talking about the reaction to this, it's basically economic shutdown. So now more and more people talk about the shutdown or the measures to fight coronavirus being more dangerous than coronavirus itself. And which is absolutely, it's a viable point of view. And that's something we should be discussing. We should be talking about not only how we should cope with coronavirus, but how we are going to tackle the consequences and economic consequences of this problem in the future. So as for the population itself, we can obviously see that they've relaxed a bit. So, when we were just in the first weeks of the lockdown, people preferred to stay at home, even if they, couldn't work from home, right? They still stayed at home. But now when you leave your place and go outside, you can see people enjoying the good weather. You can see that the traffic is back to normal, which is basically showing you that the city is going back to life, even if we still have a lot of companies keeping their employees at home or even closed.
Yeah.
So generally the population is just being hopeful that this will be over soon. And I think one of the reasons why they're so relaxed is that they don't really imagine what their life is going to be like after the lockdown. So probably they still think that they will go back to their normal, average, everyday lives. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. And one of the reasons why we don't see this realization is the lack of communication. Because no one can tell you what exactly it's going to be like when we go back to the life after or post the lockdown. So a lot of the things are still unknown, and they could be actually contributing to why people are suddenly enjoying the springtime.
Right.
Instead of being overpowered by what is happening. And so I guess I could talk some more about the, how the economy is doing in the country.
Yeah. I was actually gonna move to that because you were kind of touching on that issue already in your answer. So, I mean, what's going on when it comes to things like bankruptcies, unemployment claims, shops closing and whatnot? Has the government announced any new sort of stimulus measures, or tax payments being postponed or tax cuts, that sort of thing? I mean, what's the landscape look like there?
So since the lockdown was extended, we pretty much have the same situation when it comes to the stimulus package, which was never, a big deal, because we can't afford a huge stimulus package. So so far what we have is we don't have to pay the land tax, which is mostly helpful to big companies and to big landowners. And we don't have to pay the social contribution, but it's just for 2 months.
Right.
So that's just, until the end of April, and we haven't heard anything about extending this. I think I mentioned it during our first conversation, but these social contributions, they're used to fund our pensions fund. And it's becoming a bigger problem right now, because as an extra step to help out the people, the government has promised one-time payments to the retirees who make, let's say not make, but receive less than 5,000 hryvnias a month, which is a bit less than $200.
Okay.
And so this extra payment is 1,000 hryvnias. So it's not that much until we start counting, because 90% of the retirees in Ukraine do receive less than 5,000 hryvnias a month. So if you're going to, deliver this extra payment to so many people, it's going to become a problem, since our pensions fund is already almost empty, and then you don't have the social contributions coming in. So that's the problem with the steps that so far we've seen the government taking, that they don't really take into account the consequences of those promises. So that's going to be a problem soon. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the economists are saying that the economy will be hit the strongest in about 6 months because of coronavirus. So that's what we should be bracing ourselves for. But what do we see right now? So first of all, according to the Kiev authorities, about the unemployment claims. So since the beginning of quarantine, it started March the 16th, they've already seen the increase of 45% in those claims. And let's remember that Kiev, being the biggest city in Ukraine, being the capital city, is basically the center of all business and work life. So if Kiev is being hit like that, then most of Ukraine is being hit even more. And so far we have the approximation of how many businesses had to close around Ukraine, and it's about 50%. For various reasons, but a lot of them being that it's not that the government told them to close, but when you shut down all public transportation in the country, you're pretty much making it impossible for people to get to work. So, but I do feel that 50% could be a bit optimistic when we're talking about this. So right now we have some predictions regarding the GDP. And for 2020, we had the predicted GDP growth of about 4%. So now we are already seeing that it's going to be about a 4% decrease. Mm-hmm. And we should be expecting the inflation rate of about 12% instead of the 5.5 that was originally budgeted for end of last year. So that's what it looks like so far. And some business associations talked about the numbers for entrepreneurs who had to stop working because of this quarantine. Because in Ukraine, being a private entrepreneur is a popular way of leading your work life because the status allows you to pay just 5% taxes on everything you make. That's why basically Ukraine is a country of private entrepreneurs. But so far, because of the lockdown, because of coronavirus and the restrictions, about 700,000 private entrepreneurs had to stop their activities. So that's obviously going to impact a lot, how much money they will be making and how much money they will be spending. And one other interesting number is the number of Ukrainians who returned to Ukraine because of the global situation. And we hear numbers from 400,000 up to 2 million. But real numbers are closer to 500,000. And so these are the people who used to work abroad and then send their money back to their families in Ukraine. And for a long time, this was a really strong stabilizing factor for our economy, the money that they were sending back. So now that's certainly not going to be the case. And so once again, we are facing the situation that if we want to get out of this economic turmoil, we will be heavily reliant on foreign aid. So we are talking about the IMF and we are talking about the European Commission, who's already pledged to send 1.2 billion euros or dollars our way, which is a huge aid package compared to what other countries will be receiving. So we are getting more dependent. We were dependent already, but right now we're getting even more dependent on the foreign aid.
Right. I mean, it sounds like, the Ukrainian economy was in a bit of a precarious position already to begin with. And that, of course, the lockdown has done little other than just exacerbate the situation. When you look into the future, I mean, does it look like there's any sort of exit strategy? Has the government given any sort of indication as to when the lockdown will end, or will they start doing a sort of a graduated kind of letting up of the lockdown, sort of like what we're seeing here already in Austria? And also finally, in terms of the economic forecast for the rest of the year, there's some people were talking at one point about a V-shaped kind of recovery, or maybe U-shape, or maybe just an L shape. What do you see coming forward for Ukraine?
Well, April 24th, when the extended lockdown was supposed to be over, the government already started talking about, extending it some more. And they came out with a roadmap for easing lockdown restrictions after May the 11th. But unlike what I've seen for other countries' plans, ours is a bit more vague. And they are not really indicating any dates, or months or whatever. But what we have so far is 5 phases for easing the lockdown, depending on the infection rates and the number of patients in hospitals and the number of recovered patients. So the first phase, which might start after May the 11th, and so far we see the positives in the data from the healthcare ministry that shows that this is possible, because just like today compared to yesterday, we had 100 fewer cases.
Okay.
So, which is a big deal, because let's say yesterday we had 472 cases, today we had 370 cases. So the difference is pretty big, and if it keeps going that way, we will indeed be able to start easing lockdown. It's just the first phase for now sounds, honestly speaking, not really as a big change at all.
Right.
So they are thinking about allowing people back into parks,
Mm-hmm.
and allowing some stores to open that are not grocery stores, but we still do not know under which conditions, which is a big deal, because they might issue those strict or over-the-top conditions closer to the dates themselves. So right now we can't tell which stores will be open. They will allow coffee places to reopen, but just to go. And they will allow notaries and lawyers to go back to work, and allow for team trainings. So I guess they're thinking about, resuming the usual sports seasons, because we're talking about professional sports. And but if we look into this roadmap, the first thing we should be looking at is the public transportation, because when we resume the public transportation, that's when we know that most people will be able to go back to work. And this is phase 4. Okay. So we can see that it's still far away. Yes, of course, they're talking about reopening underground, but only for people with special permits. Okay. So it's not going to be a big deal to anyone. So public transportation is one thing, and then the other thing is educational establishments, because that's where a lot of people are employed. So we do not see any clarity when it comes to that, because they're talking about allowing graduates to go back to schools during phase 2, but it's just them, so that they can have some time to prepare for the testing that will allow them, to move on and go to universities later. And other than that, some more educational facilities will reopen during phase 3, which we have no idea when it's going to happen. So basically what it looks like right now is that schools and universities will mostly reopen in September. So once again, it's what we need is clarity on that issue, because having to stay home with kids is also preventing a lot of parents, from being able to resume their business activities. Exactly. So the lack of clarity when it comes to this roadmap is preventing us from thinking about the impact on the economy, because we don't know who will be able to go back to work and when. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see, because basically the stage 4, the public transportation, has really strict conditions for when it will be able to be enforced. It's basically like 5 cases per oblast, which is the territorial division in Ukraine. Okay. And 5 cases per oblast, it will most certainly not be, at the same time all over Ukraine. So we'll have to see how local authorities are also reacting, and implementing this roadmap as well. But, all we can do is just wait and see, and wait for some more details. Obviously, we're all very eager to hear what's going to happen next. What is worrying is that so far we don't see, we don't have any clarity about how the fund, the coronavirus fund, will be used. The amount of money that they were able to put into it is about the third of what they were originally planning. Right. but we still don't know how they're going to use it. So we don't know how much help businesses will actually be receiving, because from these phases we can already see that no, we will not be able to all go back to work in May. So it's difficult to say how exactly the government is planning to support these people. And we were never really going to rely on cash influx, because it's not really a possibility in Ukraine, unlike what we saw happening and still see happening in the US. But then what we would like to see is a plan from the government for creating a more favorable environment for businesses when the lockdown is lifted, when all of the restrictions are removed, including, lowering taxes, right? Because that's something that certainly would help them a lot, when they have to come back to the new normal and try, looking for ways to cover those holes, budget holes and income holes that they had to survive with during these however many months of quarantine that we're going to have. So far we do not see that. We have a number of commissions created for it, but when we're talking about Eastern Europe, we usually joke that if you don't want a problem resolved, you create a commission to resolve this problem. So that's something that organizations like mine are thinking about, and I believe that we will be creating extra pressure for the government, to think about it some more, and to start, making real steps and real changes that will actually help the business, and through the business, the rest of the society in Ukraine. So that's about it. And as for the economy coming back to normal, we are expected to go back to some economic growth next year. So we will not be able to, jump back right away in 2020. So far we see projections that it's going to be second or third quarter of 2021, with the expected growth of about 3%. So it's not particularly, let's say, L-shaped, right? But it looks closer to the U shape.
Right.
For now, because like I said, from this roadmap, you can't really tell when, we will be able to start growing again, when people will be able to go back to work. So we know that at some point they will, at some point, and hopefully this year, but we are expecting the peak in infections middle of May, which would be post-Easter period for us, because unfortunately during the Easter time we still had a lot of people flocking to churches for in-person celebrations, and that's honestly another mistake when it comes to the government's reaction, because churches should have been closed. And they already saw the warning signs, because a week before Easter, people went to churches, huge numbers, not as high as regularly, but it was still 170,000 people. And then, so this peak that we are expecting will be because of people going to churches, and then, crowded spaces and everything like that. So, we are expecting an increase, and hopefully it's not going to be as bad as it might be. We're just bracing ourselves also for the possibility of coronavirus rates coming in waves,
Yeah.
which a lot of countries are talking about, which is also a worrying thing, because it will mean that when we gradually come out of this lockdown, we might have to go back into another one in whatever form it's going to take place. So ours has been very strict, very severe, very serious, and might have been too much, you know. And probably when we look back in a year or so, we will be saying that it was too much. We are hoping that it's not going to be something that kills our economy, you know, for real, because for the past couple of weeks, we are already seeing and hearing rumors that a lot of the establishments that are supposed to be closed during the period, they are working, you know, illegally.
Right, yeah.
So we can see that our shadow economy is once again proving to be the driver for economic growth in the country. So just people cannot live with this lockdown and just, you know, put pause to their lives for such a long time. And they want to go back, be it legally or illegally. So we are anxious and staying hopeful.
All right. Well, we wish you all the best of luck, and we've got our fingers crossed for you from over here in Vienna. So, so there was Nataliya Melnyk, director at the Bendukidze Free Market Center in Kiev, Ukraine. Thank you so much for being with us, Nataliya.
Thank you for listening, and stay healthy.
You too. Thank you. If you enjoyed what you've seen, then please come check out more videos just like this at fmrs.online for our ongoing free market roadshow. We're dealing with everything from COVID-19 to actually our theme for this year, which is disruptive innovation, which is also very timely as well if you think about it. And please don't forget to like our videos as well as subscribe to our channel on YouTube, Austrian Economics Center. Thank you.